Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Center for Persian Studies at UCI. And it is really a great pleasure to have a lecture during summer. We had graduations just today and this past week. But since we need Dr. Maghsoudlou to give us a lecture, because it's really a pleasure to know him, and in the last conference that we went up of his important work before, or if he leaves Los Angeles very soon, to hear him as to what he has to say about objects. Dr. Maghsoudlou is the Gramian-Emrani Family Curatorial Fellow in Ancient Iranian Art at LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, which was just redone apparently beautifully, which we shall all go. He has a PhD in art history from Southern Methodist University, and he specializes in the art of late antique Iran. In the last conference on Nasdaq, he gave a brilliant paper on objects and as it may relate to the Nasdaqite world, how that may have impacted the production of the material, luxury and non-luxury material. It was really fascinating. Before joining LACMA, he was a teaching fellow at the Southern Methodist University, and he taught courses on the art of Iran, on Western Asia, ancient art, as well as Islamic world. And he previously, before coming to LACMA, he was the Andrew W. Mellon Fellow at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, another wonderful place, where he worked on the Iranian silver vessels, maybe Sasanians, I would assume. And he has published an important study on the reception of Sasanian rock reliefs in ancient West and East, as well as a forthcoming article in another important academic journal, Ars Orientalis, about silver cups in late antiquity, or late antique Iran. Today, as you can see from the title, he starts with this quote, "Give them a cup of gold, the reception and recontextualization of Sasanian silver vessels."
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for Dr. Daryei for the very kind introduction. And thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here at the illustrious Jordan Center. And many thanks to Dr. Mohnad for facilitating this talk, this event. So I'll go ahead and just start. Silver vessels are among the most important material remains of Sasanian Iran and have attracted scholarly interest for more than a century. Only a small number of these objects have been recovered from controlled excavations, and the vast majority were either discovered by chance or acquired through the art market, often with dubious provenance. More important is that most of these discoveries did not take place within the borders of late antique Iran, within the borders of the Sasanian Empire, as one might expect, but rather in the forests and steppe forests of the Ural region and western Siberia in what is now northern Russia. Even if we were able to confirm with certainty that all these vessels were originally manufactured in the Iranian world, a task that is not as easy as it may sound, it is still true that they spend much of their history far outside the borders of Iran. Traditionally, art historians and archaeologists tended to focus on the moment of creation, anchoring art objects to a specific historical period and a geographical location. An underlying principle in this approach holds that identifying an object's origin is crucial to understanding its meaning, why it was made, and what it reveals about the culture that made it. There's no denying that the question of origin is important, and the origin of an object plays a key role in determining its initial meaning and purpose. But the origin of the object alone cannot determine how it is ultimately perceived and used. Equally important is to consider what happened to the object once it was made and had left its original setting, and what purposes and meanings were ascribed to it over time. In other words, the meaning of an object is not singular, and it is not fixed at the moment of its creation. Those silver vessels that traveled beyond the temporal and regional borders of Sasanian Iran transformed into transcultural and transtemporal entities, acquiring new meanings and often new functions. No longer tied to a single time and a single place, they came to embody layered and entangled histories. As Avinoam Shalom puts it, quote, whereas in its initial setting, the object's function and history were bound in a single unity of space and time, the cross-cultural objects have usually two, if not more, lives, end quote. My primary aim in this paper is to trace the trajectories of Sasanian civil vessels across time and space through a series of case studies. I examine how these vessels acquired new meanings and functions as they entered new historical and cultural setting. I begin with the period immediately following the fall of the Sasanian Empire, examining vessels that remained within Iran and neighboring regions, where their pre-Islamic associations were still strong and recognizable. In the second part, I will turn to a geographically and culturally distant context in which those original associations had fully disappeared. The Muslim conquest of Iran in the mid-7th century increased the influence of the Arabic language and Arab cultural practices among the higher strata of Iranian society. However, this period was relatively short-lived, as the Iranian aristocracy regained its political autonomy in the 9th and 10th centuries. Sometimes referred to as the Persian Renaissance or Iranian Intermezzo. This period witnessed the rise of several native Iranian dynasties. These dynasties were founded against the backdrop of a broader socio-cultural movement characterized by an active re-engagement with Iran's pre-Islamic heritage. This was most clearly expressed in the rise of new Persian literature and a growing antiquarian interest among the elites. Particularly within the political sphere, Sasanian royal symbolism was revived. Rulers claimed genealogical ties to Sasanian kings and adopted for themselves prestigious pre-Islamic titles such as the Shahanshah or the King of Kings. Antiquarian interest also involved an active engagement with the material culture of pre-Islamic Iran, particularly those pertaining to Persian royalty. Elites searched for relics of the ancient kings, aiming to restore them for their own political purposes. For instance, Mardavich, who ruled in the 10th century, the founder of the Ziyarid dynasty, envisioned the re-establishment of a Zoroastrian empire centered in Ctesiphon. Reportedly, before his assassination, he was considering the reconstruction of the Sasanian palace of Evan Kasra to serve as his residence and seat of power. Al-Masoudi provides further insights into Mardavich's antiquarian ambitions, which were notably reflected in his interest in Sasanian material culture. Quote, he made himself a throne of gold, studded with jewels, regalia, and crown of gold, adorned with various kinds of gemstones. He had inquired about the crowns of the Persian kings, so they were recreated and fashioned for him. From among them, he chose the crown of Anushiravan, or Khosrow I, son of Qubad, end quote. Much like architectural remains, surviving civil vessels from the Sasanian period responded to and shaped such antiquarian sentiments. These objects, especially ceremonial dishes whose images often directly or indirectly reference Sasanian royalty, acquired new significance in the early Islamic period due to their perceived link to the age of the ancient kings. In this way, the vessel became a medium for reviving memories, employed by Iranian elites to establish connections with their alleged forebears. Those connections were at times rooted in historical reality, but more often they were imagined, idealized, or entirely fabricated. Objects with such power can be described as relics of the past, important not only for their ability to bring the past into the present, but also for revealing how the present perceived the past. The clearest examples of this trend can be seen in the continued production of hunting plates, in direct imitation of the Sasanian prototypes. In the early Islamic period, hunting remained a favored pastime for the elites and an important symbolic marker of wealth and prestige. In this context, the Sasanian visual symbols of power, most notably manifested in the iconic image of the royal hunt, were adopted by the new rulers. Silver vessels produced after the fall of the Sasanians so closely resemble their pre-Islamic counterparts that dating individual pieces is often very difficult, if not impossible. Yet within the specific category of hunting plates, an increase in the stylization of the images, a reduced attention to the details of royal garments and headgear, and a more straightforward manufacturing process may point to an early Islamic date. And I really want to emphasize the word may here, because by no means these criteria are definitive. Particularly revealing in this context is a specific composition that reappears on a number of silver plates. It relates to a hunting expedition of the semi-legendary Sasanian king, Bahram Gur, with his Greek slave girl and harpist named Azadeh. The earliest literary version of Bahram Gur's romance, which includes this short episode, appears in the 10th century in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh. However, at least one silver plate from the Sasanian period, now in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, confirms its pre-Islamic origin. Several other silver vessels with similar compositions survive, most of which were likely produced in the early Islamic period. This formula for depicting the story of Bahram and Azadeh proved remarkably enduring across various art forms in the medieval period. Bahram Gur, or Bahram V, who ruled in the 5th century, was reimagined over time as a romantic hero, celebrated for his legendary prowess in hunting and warfare. The fascination with the images of Bahram in the later periods can be attributed to a broader cultural nostalgia for a glorified ancient past. Persian tradition remembered Bahram Gur as a just ruler and a lively prince, attentive to the pleasures of earthly life. But these qualities reflect less the historical person of Bahram than a longing for a mythical king preserved and reimagined across generations. Not only in the Iranian collective memory, but also gradually among elites across the wider Islamic world. Many princes and kings showed a special interest in Bahram's image in their quest to tie their legitimacy to the memory of the mythologized Sasanian Empire. Notably, the Buid dynasty went so far as to invent a genealogy that traced their lineage back to Bahram himself. I would like to argue that this preoccupation with the past was materially manifested in the continued production of ceremonial plates. As Susan Stewart has suggested, antiquarian sentiments require material evidence, a physical, tangible souvenir of the past. She writes that this souvenir, quote, it speaks to a context of origin through a language of longing, for it is not an object arising out of need or use value. It is an object arising out of the necessarily insatiable demands of nostalgia, end quote. The plates that were produced in the early Islamic period not only preserved and conveyed memories of pre-Islamic Iran, but also manufactured nostalgia. This was achieved in part through their imagery, as they drew on the visual repertoire of the Sasanian hunting scenes, the Sasanian royal imagery, more broadly speaking. Yet beyond their visual motifs, the materiality of silver vessels was of utmost importance in this process. Few objects could better respond to the longing for a romanticized antiquity than a tangible, tactile, and radiant silver plate. crafted meticulously from silver and gold. The plate was the ideal medium to convey notions of wealth, prosperity, and grandeur, the same ideas that were consistently associated with the memory of the Sasanian court. I argue that the silver plate could function as a mnemonic device wherein the memory of pre-Islamic Iran was preserved and continually reactivated. For Iranian elites living in the early Islamic period, such material remains, whether it was the ruins of Ivan Kasra or the hunting plates, had the potential to bridge temporal gaps and respond to those insatiable demands of nostalgia, as Susan Stewart put it. In this sense, the relationship between the plate and the beholder was reciprocal. The objects cultivated antiquarian desires just as much as those desires referenced and reinterpreted the past through the objects. It is important to emphasize that the trajectory of objects as relics of antiquity was not limited to ceremonial plates. Although plates, due to their royal imagery, could more easily function as vehicles of antiquarian quests, especially for the people in power, other categories of silver vessels operated similarly for an even broader group of patrons, including those outside of the Iranian world. Just as ceremonial plates continued to be produced in the early Islamic period, the production of drinking vessels not only continued but even expanded. These vessels did not simply reference antiquity through their images. They also served an essential role, an essential function. They were practical tableware for drinking wine within the context of the bast or majlis or late antique Iranian feasting ceremonies and banqueting ceremonies. There are numerous references in the Arabic and Persian literature that indicate the continued use and circulation of drinking vessels made of silver. In addition to those originally made during the Sasanian period that remained in use after the conquest, more objects were produced following an identical form and functional capacity. Particularly, drinking cups show little formal change, remaining largely consistent at least until the 10th century. Because of their formal and iconographic references to pre-Islamic Iran, these vessels acquired an additional lore in the Islamic period. The capacity of drinking vessels to evoke the age of the ancients could be even more substantial than that of the ceremonial plates. This is because they not only reference antiquity through their images, but also revive the actions, habits, and lifestyles of mythical kings. This was something for which a strong desire existed, not only among Iranians, but also among Arab rulers, who, according to sources, were eager to emulate the luxurious lifestyle of their Sasanian predecessors. This longing for the age of the ancients becomes especially potent in the context of drinking gatherings. In wine culture, age is highly valuable. The older the wine, the finer it is. Age is the most sought-after quality of the wine, the point repeatedly stressed in the literature. Here, for example, Abu Nawas brilliantly highlights the appeal of aged wine. Quote, "Will you then pour us wine old enough to recall the tales of Persia's emperors? He brought one out, body ravaged by time, pained by the midday heat of summer. I said to her when her brilliance shone on the cup's surface in my raised fingers, 'Tell us, wine, how many years have you?' She said, 'God rebuke you, I can't remember. I saw Thamud when their decline set in.'" End quote. The wine and the cup that held it were closely intertwined. Just as aged wine was highly valued, so too was a cup that was either itself ancient or was made to recall ancient vessels. A poem attributed to the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun, who ruled in the 9th century, can illuminate this connection. Quote, "On the festival of Khosravani, at the autumn equinox, offer the guests the ancient wine jugs, give them a cup of the old, royal vintages of the Khosrows, for this is the feast of the Persian kings." End quote. Khosravani, or which means relating to Khosrow, is an adjective frequently used in Persian and Arabic wine songs. It was used for various objects and elements that were associated with the Sasanians. Other adjectives were also used to describe ancient vessels. For instance, in a rare personal episode in the Shahnameh, Ferdowsi refers to his own Shahanshahi cup, a royal cup likely reminiscent of those used by the Sasanian kings. Ferdowsi's cup, therefore, was either an actual Sasanian heirloom or a later production modeled after Sasanian prototypes. It is difficult to connect the descriptions of individual vessels found in the literature to actual objects that survive from this period. Nevertheless, we can identify various examples likely made in the early Islamic period that in both physical and decorative features illustrate the continued appeal of the Sasanian visual and material culture. One example is an elliptical silver cup, a form that is also known as a wine boat, at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore. On either side of the vessel's exterior, a king dressed in Sasanian-style regalia is shown seated frontally on a throne and flanked by two attendants. At each pointed end of the cup stands a nude female dancer, figures that are characteristic of Sasanian serving vessels, including ewers and bottles. The design in this cup, therefore, combines the royal iconography of the ceremonial plates with the more open iconography of the female dancers that we see on later drinking vessels. Inspired by earlier models, the cup was likely made in the early Islamic period to deliberately echo the themes associated with the Sasanians. The Walters wine cup, however, is an unusual case. Unlike ceremonial plates, where figural images of kings are quite common, such representations are rare on practical drinking cups. On these objects, references to pre-Islamic traditions are usually conveyed more indirectly, through emblems of royalty, or motifs that could more broadly recall the age of the Sasanians. A notable example of these motifs is the motif of the Sinmorph, or Simorph, a composite creature rooted in Iranian mythology and often rendered as a beast with a dog's head, griffin's ears, feline paws, and a peacock's tail. Although Sinmorph appears only late in the Sasanian period, it became particularly prevalent in the early Islamic period, appearing across a wide range of art forms, including textiles, seals, and stucco panels. A number of silver vessels, roughly dated between the 7th and 10th centuries, also feature the Sinmorph. An example is a late Sasanian or early Islamic wine boat house at LACMA, as you can see on the right. And the cup's inner surface is decorated with a central motif of a Sinmorph, surrounded by 4 cranes and scattered flowers, all of which vividly gilded. It is important to note that drinking cups were used within the highly charged multi-sensory setting of drinking parties. They were often held by drinkers for hours, during which time beholders could closely examine their form and imagery. Considering this prolonged and intimate connection, I suggest that drinking from Sasanian or Sasanian-style silver cups could evoke the idea of being in the company of ancient kings and mythical heroes. The wine itself, with its intoxicating effects, could significantly deepen this experience, as we see in these lines by Abu Nawas. We built over Khosrow, or Kasra, a heaven of wine, whose sides were crowned with stars. And if Khosrow, son of Sasan, returns in his spirit, then he will no doubt choose me as a drinking companion. End quote. Similar tropes had spread across the Islamic world, as, for example, we see in this poem by Ibn Qalaqis, a 12th century Egyptian poet, who was also active in Sicily and Yemen. Quote, they turned the wine cup upon which we saw the image of Khosrow Shiravan, seated in the Ayvan of Madain, As I moved aside the wine from either side of him, the glory of Khosrow was revealed to me, end quote. Elsewhere, Ibn Khalawis more directly suggests that drinking from cups adorned with images evocative of the Persian or the Sasanian past evokes the memory of pre-Islamic kings. Quote, so greet Khosrow in your cup, revive his decayed bones with the spirit of wine that has flowed through the body of joy, end quote. Referencing such poems, Anthony Cutler has previously argued that the Arab rulers were conscious of the historical and cultural significance of relics inherited from pre-Islamic past. He highlights a cultivated awareness of antiquity during this period, a sense of history and time that was nurtured through the use and reuse of antique objects. Cutler suggested that through such engagements with remnants of antiquity, the past could be reimagined and re-experienced. Building on these insights, I would like to emphasize that it was not simply the visual aspects of silver vessels that activated nostalgia, but it was the physical act of using them as drinking vessels that transformed them into powerful relics and memory objects. Historical experience could be reenacted through the embodied experience of touching, holding, and drinking from an antique or antiqued silver vessel. In this sense, the cup brought antiquity into present. This was not necessarily a real historical antiquity, but an imagined one that responded to the beholder's desires. As I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, a large number of Iranian silver vessels have been uncovered in the northern regions of modern-day Russia. These discoveries are primarily concentrated in the Ural region, particularly along the Kama River in Perm, extending westward into parts of Volga region and eastward into western Siberia. In fact, the earliest scholarship on Sasanian silver in the early 20th century was prompted by the growing number of discoveries in this region. Given the absence of any known contact between the Sasanian Empire and the local inhabitants of these regions, it is highly unlikely that these objects were sent to northern Russia as diplomatic gifts. Therefore, the only plausible explanation for their presence is through direct or indirect trade. In late antiquity, the Eurasian world witnessed a significant expansion in trade relations, and the Silk Roads played a central role in these expanded activity. In addition to the widely recognized East-West corridor, there were other important routes within this network. Among them was the so-called fur route, a north-south trade route, through which fur and slaves from northern Russia and northeastern Europe were sold or traded for silver, gold, or other luxury goods in the markets of West and Central Asia. Early Islamic geographers provide valuable details about these mercantile relations. For example, we have the account of Ibn Rustam, who personally journeyed through northern northeastern Europe and spent time among the Rus tribes. Although these accounts provide valuable information about trade between Eastern Europe and West Asia during this period, they do not directly address the presence of Iranian silver vessels in northern Russia. Historians have proposed two potential routes that could have brought these objects to the Ural-Kama region in late antiquity, and both may have been active simultaneously. One possible route ran through the Caucasus via the Khazars, and the other was through eastern Iran and Central Asia, specifically via Sogdia and Kharazm. The question of which route played the greater role is beyond the scope of my talk today, and I must leave it for another time. But either through Central Asia or the Caucasus, a remarkable number of silver vessels producing the Iranian world made their way to northern Russia. the sheer volume of these objects, which is only a fraction of what was originally exported, raises two important questions. First, why did so many Iranian civil vessels end up so far north in the first place? And second, what happened to these objects in the centuries between their arrival and their modern rediscovery? As I will show, the case of the northern Russian finds provides a strong case for the far-reaching transcultural impact of Iranian civil vessels. Since the 17th century, travelers to the northern Russian taiga have reported that the so-called foreign silver vessels were employed in the cultic practices of the Finno-Ugric speaking inhabitants of this region. It has also been shown that the areas where many of these vessels were discovered correspond to the locations of sacrificial and cultic sites. More recent observations confirm the continuity of these patterns. An important recent case involves the rediscovery of a Sasanian hunting plate depicting a hunter king in his distinctive regalia and royal crown riding a zebu. With one hand, the king is grasping the horn of the zebu, and with the other, a long spear-like weapon, which he is using to pin down another zebu that is about to collapse to the ground. While the king might appear to be killing the second animal, as in other hunting plates, the tip of his weapon appears to be blunt and uniquely rounded. This suggests that this object might not be a weapon after all, but something akin to a bullhook or ankus, an instrument traditionally used to control and train large animals like elephants. Except for the loss of gilding, which is likely due to the repeated cleaning, the object appears to be in excellent condition. Although the piece has not yet been undergone laboratory analysis, based on the existing photographs, the design elements appear to have been executed using a combination of crimping and carving, the most advanced techniques associated exclusively with Sasanian, with silver plates commissioned by the Sasanian court. As such, both the iconographic and technical features directly point to the object's origin in Sasanian Iran. A crude inscription on the back of the plate, written in Arabic script, reads Jam Fidda. This phrase combines the Persian word jam, which means cup or dish, with the Arabic word fidda, which means silver, meaning simply a silver dish. This inscription therefore suggests that the plate was still in Iran for some time after the Muslim conquest. It then likely traveled from Iran to Central Asia and eventually reached Western Siberia via the fur route. In 2001, the plate was rediscovered at a Khanty settlement in the Shurishkar region, one of the northernmost and most remote sites where a historical object from Iran has ever been found. Arkady Bolo, the archaeologist responsible for this rediscovery, reported that the plate was wrapped in several shawls and placed on a shelf among the local family's ritual objects. He reports that the plate was used to serve sacrificial food, and when he first saw it, it still had leftover biscuit crumbs on it. Indeed, the loss of gilding confirms the frequent handling and cleaning of the plate over generations. The functional role of these vessels in northern Russia was not confined to occasional ceremonies. Reports also indicate that these vessels were carried by hunters and reindeer herders when traveling across the vast Russian taiga. Iranian hunting plates were especially revered by hunters who viewed them as sacred objects representing a local deity. The use of such plates was particularly in association with the cult of Mir Susnehum, an important deity in the pantheon of Ugric people. Mir Susnehum is commonly illustrated in local traditions as a mounted hunter surrounded by wild animals. Therefore, it is no wonder that the image of the Sasanian king pursuing prey could readily evoke this god. In this new cultural context, the association of the hunting plate with the Sasanian kings was fully replaced by a new iconographic significance rooted in the local religion. More direct evidence for the cultic significance of Iranian silver in the Urals can be found in the secondary engravings on the objects. For example, a silver plate from Anikovska in the Perm region, depicting a hunter king slaying 2 birds, features a series of secondary engravings integrated into the original imagery. These engravings show wild animals along with human figures that, according to their posture and horned headdresses, likely represent shamans. While the precise meaning of these later engravings remains unclear, they do not appear to be random. In most cases, the engravings do not obscure the existing design elements. Rather, they seem to complement them. For instance, on the Anikovska plate, we can see 2 engraved circles with lines radiating from them, appearing on either side of the king's headdress, which, like many late Sasanian crowns, carries the motifs of the sun and the moon, or the orb and the crescent. The secondary engravings, therefore, appear to be 2 stars, or celestial bodies, which, together with the king's crown, form a triad of astral bodies. In this way, the engravings were likely meant to reinforce a new iconographic significance for the king of the Sasanian hunter king. Another important example of these later engravings appears on a late antique Iranian silver plate discovered in the Urals in the 19th century and currently housed in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. This plate features a crowded composition. At its center, a nude woman is represented riding a beast. Encircling this woman, there are 4 pairs of large figures holding vases, buckets, censers, flowers, and birds. Some of these figures are standing still, while others are in a dance-like posture. This object has been attributed to Tokharistan, or ancient Bactria. And although its imagery remains enigmatic, some scholars have interpreted it as depicting scenes associated with the celebration of Zoroastrian festivals. In addition to its original imagery, the dish carries 33 later engravings on both its front and back. These engravings were not made at the same time, but were added on multiple occasions during the object's long afterlife. Some of these figures represent shamans performing a ritual dance while holding sabers. As with the Anikovska plate, the engravings appear to be engaged in a visual dialogue with the original motifs. Particularly, the shaman's dance can be seen in tandem with the dance-like movements of some of the figures on the perimeter of the plate. These engravings indicate that the dish served a cultic function for an extended period of time before its eventual transfer to France in the mid-19th century. The appeal of Iranian silver vessels to Uralic peoples was not limited to their redefined imagery. It was also rooted in the materiality of the objects. A close association existed between the cult of Mirsosnahum and precious metals, particularly silver. Referred to by the Old Ugric people as, quote, pure, bright metal, end quote. Silver held a sacred status in ritual practices. Silver plates were placed on the grounds outside of the sanctuaries, so that when Mirsosnahum descended from the sky to visit the sanctuary and receive its gifts, his horse could land its hooves on those silver plates. When Iranian silver vessels reached the Urals, their iconographic meaning and symbolic function underwent remarkable changes. They were no longer royal gifts with direct ties to the Sasanian king, nor were they drinking vessels used in the vibrant basm gatherings of late antique Iran. Instead, many of them acquired new roles as sacred icons in local rituals. Endowed with protective properties, these silver vessels could hold a deep personal attachment to their new owners as well. An Iranian silver plate carrying images of the Sasanian king could offer a spiritual comfort to a reindeer herder traveling through the long nights of the vast Siberian taiga. While we lack credible evidence for the cultic function of Sasanian vessels within their original context, that is, in the Iranian world, many of these objects indeed fulfilled such a role in northern Russia. I would like to ultimately argue that in this process of recontextualization and resignification, the materiality of silver vessels played a central role. Whether it was for Sasanian elites, early Islamic period drinkers, or reindeer herders of the Urals, silver vessels held a strong appeal precisely due to their material and technical features. The materiality of the objects afforded them an agency, a capacity to invite certain associations across cultural borders. Okay, we now get to the conclusion. In this paper, I move beyond the traditional frameworks in the discussion of Iranian silver vessels to highlight their transtemporal and transcultural significance. Identifying the object's origin in late antique Iran can illuminate their initial meanings. However, the majority of surviving silver vessels cross the temporal and regional boundaries of Sasanian Iran. And as I showed, in their new settings, their meanings and functions were often redefined. The significance of Iranian silver vessels lies precisely in their capacity to move across borders while continuing to generate meaning. Through their material brilliance and sensory appeal, they retain their power to evoke desire, fascination, and emotional response for many centuries. Their agency lay in their ability to act upon viewers and users and to invite new interpretations, an ability that extends to our own time. To understand them fully, we must therefore consider the long and often eventful afterlives as integral to their value and meaning. It is through their accumulated histories of receptions and cycles of recontextualization that Sasanian vessels reveal themselves as truly transcultural entities. The vessels we encounter in museums today are not just silent remnants of the culture that originally produced them. They have become entangled bundles of meaning, shaped by the many worlds they pass through, and hold within them numerous narratives still waiting to be unraveled. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really stimulating talk.